The second topic that I'm going to talk about is classroom behavior. Prevention is key to controlling classroom behavior, and I've learned that in this classroom and several of my other ones, and especially in my practicum, that it's difficult to address problem behaviors. It's a lot easier and more efficient to keep them from happening. Number one, transition plans, and that's in the inclusive classroom. Mastropieri and Scruggs, 2010, talks a lot about, in the behavior section, about how to transition students from one activity to the other, let them know what's happening, provide visual cues to what's happening, what you expect of them, and so on. The other one is from Pollitt, Daniel Pollitt's his presentation that he did in our class, and that is the ABCs. So the antecedents, the behavior, and the consequences. So finding out, okay, so you have your behavior, recording and observing, obviously, like, what was the antecedent to that behavior, what is the behavior itself, and what is the consequence of the behavior. And when you think about those things, what's causing it, when is it happening, you can start to kind of narrow down what it is that's causing it and how to keep that from happening. So for an example, I'll throw it out there. So you have a student who is constantly having outbursts, and the temptation might be to tell them to stop having the outbursts, send them to the counselor or the principal's office, depending on what type of outburst they're having. But if you were to look at the student, you could see maybe that the outburst is happening when they're around a certain student. Maybe they're afraid of the student, or the student is, doing something to them to antagonize them. And so you have your antecedent, and then you have the behavior, and then you have the consequences for the behavior. So as a teacher, you can look at those types of things. And so for this particular student, you could say, okay, we will move so-and-so across to the other side of the classroom. Maybe if we need to, have a little talk with both the students, try and work it out. And then the other thing to preventing behavior problems, obviously when students can't understand the material, or it's too difficult for them, or not difficult enough, that is the main problem. And I thought, for me, being an English teacher, that a lot of it could be from just the text being too difficult. And it reminded me of the Time to Act, that report that we read at the beginning of the year by the Carnegie Corporation of New York's council. Talked a lot about how once you get to the secondary level, that the literacy is very difficult. Students, the academic vocabulary is very difficult. Students need to work on their fluency. There's more complex texts over a wider subject area, so they have to be expected to read at a high level in English and social studies and science. When you address literacy, that a lot of your behavior can be reduced when you're looking at, okay, what could be an academic reason for acting out in class. I think that addressing difficulty in literacy is just as important to prevention of classroom behavior issues than, doing like the ABCs. Always recognize the good behavior. We talked about in class how we should have like the 5-to-1 ratio of good versus negative behavior that we're addressing. The positive behavior supports is extremely important for a classroom to motivate students to, have good behavior through recognizing their good behavior, which makes sense, but a lot of schools just have a punitive attitude towards students, and I've noticed that, and students don't really respond that well to it. I mean, maybe at first, and especially if they don't want to get in trouble, but there's some students who don't care, so having a PBS system in place can really help. And the other thing that Daniel Pollitt mentioned was his red thought, blue thought, which I thought was a really good idea, especially for students maybe with like social concerns, red thought, blue thought for a student with autism, for example, could be really effective because maybe they don't understand that what they're saying is something that isn't, socially accepted. And so it can be a really good way to manage behavior without being negative, recognizing the positive. For ESL students or maybe students who have trouble communicating, that can be a really good way with the colors to let them know what's going on and have them able to express themselves if speaking is difficult. So I think that's also an important consideration.